Autoimmune conditions. Lectins cause autoimmune conditions. Avoiding lectins has been shown to cure autoimmune conditions. I will say this one seems to be something that a lot of people are writing about online in various plant paradox groups. I've seen people talking about reversing their psoriasis, so there's a lot of anecdotal kind of evidence. What do we think about this claim? Is there any validity to it? I think I sent both of you, and I don't expect you to have read this, a study that I found on one of these forums that people were sharing that looked at immune response to lectins in sort of, I think, 500 individuals, males and females, suggested that maybe some people do have an immune response. What do we think about this?
So I actually had a look at that this morning, and I haven't read it in very granular detail, but I thought it was an interesting example of potentially how something could, again, be over-extrapolated. So they had specimens from 500 healthy people, and we're looking at levels of antibodies, IgG, IgM, IgA, and IgE. From a food allergy perspective, we would be typically looking at the IgE antibody. For food intolerance, people often look at IgG, but it's not a marker of food intolerance. It's actually a marker of tolerance, essentially. And you could see certain increases that were greater than the average in multiple of these markers, not just IgE, but the percentages were relatively low. So on the whole, most of the samples, and this is culturing the human blood with levels of these of different lectins, that to me wouldn't be a particularly persuasive example of these foods being particularly problematic. Although if we were to, I guess, take it at its highest, it might indicate that at least some small proportion of individuals, but we wouldn't be able, again, because of the methodology of this study, to come away with that conclusion until this was actually repeated in a kind of more in vivo setting. So yeah, I can see how an online community of people who aren't really interested in the methodology and the context of the wider research around an area would take something like this and run off with it. But I don't think it would be particularly persuasive, and I don't think it would be something that you could conclude that this is in fact an effect worth considering until it was shown in an in vivo context. And the fact that other antibodies like IgG were elevated, it just looked a little bit unspecific to me.
And I would bet if you were to repeat that with other compounds found in other foods, you'd probably get similar results. So you'd probably have a small number of people with slightly higher levels of certain antibodies versus others. So yeah, it's one of those things where you need to take a step back and look at the broader evidence, the human outcome data, and is there any? And as Alan suggested, there really isn't at this point.
And it does seem like it's a case of people perhaps sort of jumping the gun or running with it and misinterpreting it, because the authors themselves, I have a quote from them here in front of me, they weren't getting carried away, and they were actually warning people not to get carried away with the results of their own study. They said these findings are greatly different from the unjustified claims in a book that was published in 2017. In The Plant Paradox, Dr. Steven Gundry argues that lectins, a group of naturally occurring proteins found in nearly all plants, are the root cause of most illnesses plaguing modern society, and therefore should be completely removed from our diet. We strongly disagree with this kind of misleading blanket condemnation of all lectins at all times, everywhere. And then, to Alan's last point, they go on to say clinical trials would be needed to determine correlations between given anti-lectin antibodies and particular autoimmune diseases.